A phone buzzes in a quiet London hotel room, and whoever answers it has no idea that within 3 days, an entire nation will hold its breath because of her. A young player from a modest tennis background, barely known outside her own circle a few years earlier, is about to step onto the most famous grass court in the world. Right now, Alex is simply lacing up her shoes, unaware she's about to become the most talked about name in her country's history. Rewind for a second. Before the tournament, her name barely came up in the predictions. The spotlight belonged to bigger names, proven champions, players with trophies already on their shelves. Alex sat quietly somewhere in the draw, the kind of entry casual fans scroll past. Her opening match comes and goes almost unnoticed. She wins, but it isn't a headline yet, just a small ripple. Back home, a handful of loyal fans check a score app, nod, and move on. Ripples don't stay small forever. She wins her second match, and the ripple becomes a wave a few more people notice. By the third match, the shift is undeniable. She's winning in a way that pulls people closer to their screens, with a stillness under pressure that seems out of place for someone on a stage this big. Commentators start repeating her name. Analysts pull up her stats mid-broadcast, and someone who has never cared about tennis finds themselves holding their breath over a single deuce point. Who is this player nobody warned us about? How far can this go? Nobody has the answer yet, and that uncertainty is exactly what keeps people refreshing their screens. Then comes the fourth round, a sentence that carries more weight than it sounds like it should. No Filipino singles player had ever reached this point at Wimbledon before. Not one. Ever. Every point in that match wasn't just a point, it was history being written in real time, and millions of people found themselves watching the exact moment it happened. In Manila, a father wakes his sleeping son at 2 a.m, refusing to let the boy miss this. An office worker sits in her car on a lunch break, phone braced against the dashboard, unwilling to go back inside until the match is decided. A group of teenagers crowd around one phone screen in a dim dorm room, holding their breath at the same second. None of them know each other, yet they're bound by the same nervous energy and the same unspoken hope the moment doesn't slip away. The quiet magic of sport, turning strangers into family. Reaching a milestone like that carries a weight most people never see. The moment Alex became a headline, she also became a target. Every match afterward was an event, and events come with expectations that can crush even the most talented athletes. So the real question wasn't whether Alex could win one big match, but whether she could survive everything after. Interview requests multiplying overnight, cameras that used to ignore her now following everywhere, every gesture suddenly picked apart. For many athletes, that kind of attention becomes suffocating, changing how they move, think, and play. But something strange kept happening whenever cameras caught her between points. She never looked rattled or like someone drowning under the pressure. If anything, she looked like someone who had quietly decided, long before any of this started, that outside noise wasn't going to dictate how she played. That composure became its own story, almost more compelling than the wins themselves, because people don't just fall for results, they fall for how someone carries themselves when everything is on the line. Slowly, something bigger than a tennis run started forming. It stopped being about one player's tournament and became about what that tournament represented. Every kid holding a second-hand racket on a cracked provincial court suddenly had a new answer for what's possible, and every parent who once told their child that dreams like this belonged to other countries had to quietly take that back. The story wasn't just unfolding on a grass court in London anymore, it was unfolding in homes, classrooms, and barangay courts with a tennis net dragged in for the first time in years. Every match after that milestone carried a different pressure, the kind that comes from suddenly being seen. Opponents studied her more carefully, analysts picked apart her previous matches, and the surprise element that carried her through the early rounds was gone, replaced by something harder to manage: expectation. You can't hit a serve past expectation. The only way through is refusing to let it control you. With every round, the numbers watching back home kept climbing, until a handful of fans had turned into a country rearranging its sleep schedule around one name. Eventually the run reached its natural conclusion. Every story, however magical, reaches the point where the match ends and the flight home gets booked. But instead of quieting down, the story was about to explode into something else entirely. Word started spreading about which flight she'd be on, not through any announcement, but through quiet momentum. Someone canceled a shift. Someone convinced their family to drive 2 hours. Someone made a sign the night before with markers borrowed from a little sister's school supplies. Nobody was told to come. People simply decided this wasn't a moment they wanted to experience secondhand. By the day itself, the airport had built an atmosphere less like a scheduled arrival and more like the final scene of a movie nobody had finished writing. Flags stretched over barriers, homemade signs bobbed above the crowd, and phones were already recording, some for over an hour before there was anything to record because a stranger's story had quietly become personal to them. The wait stretched on, ripples of excitement rising through the crowd every few minutes as someone with a similar silhouette appeared near the doors, only to deflate when it turned out to be someone else. Strangers swapped favorite moments from the tournament, bonding instantly over a shared obsession. Waiting together turns isolated excitement into something communal. Then word rippled through the crowd that the flight had landed. Flags lifted higher, phones rose at a sharper angle, and security quietly repositioned near the barriers. Even travelers with no idea what was happening began slowing down, pulled in by the sheer size of the anticipation. Then the doors opened. What followed wasn't a polite round of applause, it was a wall of sound, raw and immediate, from people who'd been holding something in for weeks and finally got permission to release it. Names were shouted, flags waved violently, and some people simply stood frozen, phone raised, unable to process the moment. And in the middle of all that noise, Alex walked forward. Athletes who reach sudden fame sometimes let it change them instantly. A little more distance, a little more performance. Instead, she slowed down, looked at people, smiled in a way that didn't seem rehearsed, thanked the ones closest to the barrier, and carried the same calm that had gotten her through every high-pressure point on that grass court. That detail mattered more than almost anything else that day, because performances earn admiration, but character earns something that lasts longer. Clips of that arrival spread online within minutes, shared by people who couldn't attend but refused to let the moment pass without being part of it. Filipinos living abroad watched those clips and felt pride and homesickness collide at once. Some had never followed tennis before that summer, yet there they were, refreshing highlight clips at odd hours, suddenly invested in a sport they'd ignored their whole lives. The airport wasn't the ending, it was the beginning of a new chapter with even higher stakes. Breakthroughs are thrilling, but they're also dangerous. The moment you prove what you're capable of, the whole world expects you to prove it again, immediately. That's the shadow now stretching over Alex's next chapter. The celebrations wouldn't last. Within days, the messages would slow, and the quiet routine of professional sport would return, the kind nobody films, built on empty courts before sunrise. Victories get celebrated in airports, but they're built in silence, through repetition and discipline that doesn't care whether anyone's watching. And now, with an entire country paying attention, those quiet sessions carry a different kind of pressure than before. The next challenge wasn't just another tournament, it was an entirely different surface and rhythm. Hard courts instead of grass, different footwork, different timing. Grass rewards certain instincts. Hard courts punish different weaknesses entirely. So the same question that followed Alex through every stage of Wimbledon returns now, louder than ever. Can she do it again, and carry the weight of a nation's expectations without cracking under the shift? Nobody knows yet, and that uncertainty is exactly why people can't look away. Meanwhile, far from any stadium, something else just as meaningful was quietly happening. On cracked public courts across small towns, kids who had never picked up a racket before were asking their parents for one. Coaches were turning students away for lack of space, and families who never considered tennis a realistic path were driving across town for lessons. None of that will trend, but it might be the most important part of this story. A breakthrough's real legacy isn't always the trophy, it's the ripple it creates in people never in the spotlight. Somewhere in that crowd of kids dreaming bigger, there might be another Alex, waiting for her own fourth-round moment. Maybe that's why this story refuses to end cleanly. It isn't built around a single result, but around momentum that keeps expanding long after the original event has passed. Which brings us back to where we started. That quiet hotel room in London, before the airport, before the flags, before the millions of people who rearranged their schedules around a name they barely knew a few weeks earlier. If you told her then that a tournament run was about to change how an entire country saw itself, she probably wouldn't have believed you. That's usually how the biggest moments work. They arrive quietly, disguised as an ordinary Tuesday match, and then, without any clear turning point, everything shifts. So now the plane has landed again, except this time it's heading somewhere new, toward hard courts, tougher competition, and scrutiny that didn't exist months earlier. The cheering has faded, but the story hasn't closed. It's only turned a page, because somewhere out there, another crowd is already forming, another set of alarms already being set for odd hours of the night. Whether the next chapter brings another milestone or a setback, one thing has already been proven. This was never just about tennis. It's about how one person's quiet determination can pull an entire nation out of indifference and into obsession within weeks, about strangers standing shoulder to shoulder in an airport for someone they'd never met, because her story had quietly become their story too. The biggest moments rarely feel big while they're happening. They only reveal their true size afterward, once you realize you were standing in the middle of history without knowing it. So the real question isn't whether Alex can repeat what she did at Wimbledon, it's what happens to a country that has already tasted what's possible. Once people believe something like this can happen, they don't quietly go back to not believing it. And that, more than any single match or airport homecoming, might be the most powerful part of this story still waiting to unfold.